Hello and welcome. This is the day the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad. Today we're reflecting on the subject of we are free. We are free. And we'll be looking at Paul's spiritual journey that he went on. Paul describes his spiritual journey in a number of places, including in the book of Galatians. Paul had been a religious zealot. He was well-read and he was well-studied. He worked hard. He worked extremely hard to get it right in terms of following all the laws, following all the customs, and doing everything precisely the way it was supposed to be done. And not only did he do this for himself, he also went to a great deal of effort and energy to persecute all those who taught a different way, who went and saw things a different way. He persecuted folks even up to the level where in the book of Acts it has Paul playing a key role in the execution of Stephen, one of the earliest deacons of the church. Eventually, Paul came to see his type of religion, his type of legalism, as a real burden and a curse. And after his experience on the road to Damascus, where he had a profound spiritual experience of God's all-encompassing love, it came to transform his thinking and his practice. He discovered a type of freedom that he had never experienced before. Our key verse for this morning comes from 2 Corinthians, the 3rd chapter, and we'll be looking at verse 17 in particular. Now the Lord is the Spirit, and where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. I will read that again. Verse 17 of 2 Corinthians, the 3rd chapter. Now the Lord is the Spirit, and where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. That was a key mention in the passage of the text. Lectionary text goes from 3:12 to 4:2, and he's really talking about the understanding about how in the experience of God, the veil had been removed from his mind. The veil had been removed from his mind, and he was able to perceive and understand God differently. But in the middle of that, he talked about how where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. Where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. And we're just going to reflect on how we can be free. Now I'm going to just look at a couple of the text. Again, I made reference to the Galatians passage, and one of the texts that really lifts up how Paul felt about it and what Paul went through in his spiritual transformation, his journey, come from chapter 3, verses 10 and 11. He said, "For all who rely on the works of law are under a curse. As it is written, cursed is everyone who does not continue to do everything written in the book of the law." Clearly, no one relies on the law is justified before God, because the righteous will live by faith. One of the things that Paul came to see is that he really worked hard to really try and follow the law, and it became too much. Despite his best efforts, it was just impossible, and so he lived with this cycle of having this burdens. When you think about the amount of stress that he had, that he was never measuring up, never pleasing God. When you think about the level of guilt that he had, that he would keep trying and he would keep falling short, he would keep trying and falling short. At some point, you may even think about the shame that he may have experienced. That he would keep trying, and he would fall short. In other places, Paul writes about a thorn that he had in his flesh. He was never specific about it, but whatever it is, it's something that he prayed to God multiple times on, at least 3 different times, and yet there was no answer, or at least there was no answer that removed that thorn. That Paul's way of being was a real burden to him. How many people who are religious, how many people who are followers of Christ are experiencing Christianity, are experiencing that the way Paul experienced it, where instead of it being life-giving and giving us freedom, it's actually, again, filling us with fear, anxiety, worry. Paul came to have a different experience because he discovered through God's love that we are free. He discovered that nothing could separate us from God's love. In fact, in Romans 8 and 38 and verses 39, He says, "Nothing shall separate you from the love of God, for I am persuaded that neither death, nor life, nor angels, nor principalities, nor powers, nor things present, nor things to come, nor height, nor depth, or any other creature shall be able to separate us from the love of God, which is in Christ Jesus." See, instead of having to earn this, and instead of having to try and measure up to an impossible list of tasks that God has for us, Paul discovered that God's love is unconditional, that God's love is all-encompassing. So God's love for each of us is all-encompassing. It's unconditional, and there's nothing that can separate us from God's love. God's love helped to break the yoke of the guilt and the shame and the anxiety and the fear and the worry, and even of the struggles that he had within himself to live up to the standard, because he would keep trying to live up to the standard, and he would keep falling short. Paul came to understand that now the Lord is Spirit, and where the Spirit of the Lord, there is freedom. Paul, later on in Galatians, he talked about the fruits of the Spirit. In fact, Paul said, "The fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, forbearance, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. And against such things there is no law." In other words, when we're led by the Spirit, when we live in the Spirit, we experience love and joy. We share love and joy. We share peace and forbearance with one another. We share kindness and goodness and faithfulness and gentleness with each other. And we discover a level of self-control. But it's all that when we realize that the Lord is the Spirit, that when we allow ourselves to be led by the Spirit, we're no longer under a curse. We're no longer following a list of rules. We don't have the burden of always trying to get it right, nor do we have the fear of thinking that we are not good enough and that we aren't enough, because nothing can separate us from the love of God. Nothing will ever separate us from the love of God. Sometimes, even in reading Paul's writing, we are so stuck. We're so stuck with trying to measure up. We're so stuck with the idea of rule following. We're so stuck with the idea of a harsh and a mean God, that we miss some of the beauty in some of the other words that Paul has written. In Romans 14, Paul wrote these words: "Who are you to judge someone else's servant? To their own master, servants stand or fall." And then he wrote this: "And they will stand, for the Lord is able to make them stand." Many times when we read passages like in Romans 14, we will key in on the idea that every single one of us has to stand before the judgment seat of God. That's in that text. But we miss the whole idea that, "and they will stand, for the Lord is able to make them stand." We miss the idea that God's love is all-encompassing, and it's for everyone. It's for every single one of us. And that ultimately, even though we would all be accountable for judgment, God makes each and every single one of us stand because of God's love, because God's grace. Now we're the Spirit. Now the Lord is Spirit, and where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. We don't have to be racked up by fear. We don't have to be racked up by worry. We don't have to be concerned about our doubt. We don't have to be worried that we're not quite believing the right things and understanding it the right way, that we didn't have the right confession of faith, that if we didn't get baptized the right way, that therefore we weren't going to make it into heaven, or that God was going to reject us or turn his back on us, that because we didn't do the communion the right way, that God was going to reject us or turn God's back on us, because we fall short, or because we have a misunderstanding of the scriptures, or that we didn't get everything right, that God was going to reject us or turn his back on us. We are free of all that. Sometimes we think about all the mistakes that we've done in the past, the types of people that we are, or the types of people that we used to be, and we're afraid that God can can never love us, can never accept us, can never redeem us. And to all of that, we know that that is not the case, because there's nothing that can separate us from the love of God. And God is our Lord. And the Lord is Spirit. And where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. No, there's no amount of rule following that will ever allow us to get it right. Every single one of us falls short in some way, and most of us fall short in some ways every single day. So almost every single one of us falls short just about every single day in some way. But none of that separates us from God's love. See, the Lord is Spirit. The Lord is Spirit. And where the Spirit of the Lord is, there's freedom. And we get to live into a new way of being in the world. We get to live in a new way of being in the world. That we are no longer under judgment. We no longer run around judging each other as the way Paul used to judge other people, the way Paul used to persecute everyone else. In fact, he basically told each of us to live according to our conscience, to live according to our understanding, because we have to understand that none of us actually sees everything. None of us understands everything. None of us knows everything. All of our best understanding, all of our best prophecy and knowledge and wisdom, it's all incomplete. There will come a time, and I believe that time is at the end of this earthly life. There will come a time when we see everything fully and completely, but at this point we don't see everything, we don't understand everything, we don't know everything, and the things that we know are woefully incomplete. But the one thing that is complete is God's love, and that's what we live on. So we are free. I just want to let you know, brothers and sisters, siblings, if there's anyone who's struggling with shame, you can let that go. God's love has it covered. If there's anyone who's worried about guilty, God's love has us covered. Nothing can separate us from it. If there's some of us who are worried that we're falling short, that we're not getting it right, that we have the wrong understanding, we don't have to worry about that. God's love and grace has that covered. See what happens when the Spirit comes into us and we allow ourselves to be guided by the Spirit. We have a type of freedom. We have a type of freedom because when we are moving in love, there's no law against that. When we're moving in joy, there's no law against that. When we're moving in peace, there's no law against that. When we're practicing forbearance with one another, there's no law against that. When we're talking about being kind, there's no law against that. When we're talking about being faithful, there's no law against that. When we're talking about being gentle, there is no law against that. And when we're talking about self-control, there is no law against that. Notice the passage said self-control, not control of other people. See, ultimately, we will all stand or fall before God. But as Paul said, they will stand, for the Lord is able to make them stand. In other words, we will all stand before the Lord, not because of us, not because of who we are or what we've done or what we didn't do. We will stand before the Lord because of God's love and God's grace. God's love and God's grace makes us free. We can set the burden down. We're no longer cursed. We're no longer under a law that we can't meet. We don't have to keep coming back over and over again. This is not a mission impossible. We're invited to live in love. Now, the Lord is Spirit, and where the Spirit of the Lord is, there's freedom. We are free, siblings. We're free, brothers and sisters. We are free to live in God's all-encompassing and all-comprehensive and all-encompassing love. We are free. Peace be with you.